Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this edition of the Free Thought Forum, brought to you by the friendly folks at Pennsylvania Nonbelievers. Our first order of business here will be to tell you about the upcoming events and shows here. But be sure to stay tuned here for our feature presentation that will be featuring Brian Fields, who's president of PAN, and Jim Eshleman, who is a member of PAN Lancaster. And they will be discussing free will. Tomorrow, 27th of May, is the Lancaster meeting at Isaac's on Manheim Pike, and it'll be run from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. 6th of June is the York meeting at the UUCY Carriage House on 925 South George Street, and it'll run from 10 a.m. to 12 noon. At 10th of June will be the Lebanon branch meets at the Batdorf restaurant from 7 to 9 p.m. And on the 11th of June is the Harrisburg/Lemoyne meeting, which runs from 7 to 9 p.m. at Isaac's on West Market Street. 16th of June is the Chambersburg meeting and is at the Supreme Buffet from 7 to 9 p.m. Upcoming events. 31st of May is the riverboat ride, which leaves the City Island dock in Harrisburg at 10 a.m. sharp. Be sure to get there, otherwise you will miss the boat. 7th of June is the kickoff of our Adopt a Highway effort. June the 4th through June the 10th, there are also days that PAN is helping to man the baseball game concession stand to help raise funds for the Margaret Mole Home. Thursday, June the 18th, PAN will have a booth at the Jubilee Day in Mechanicsburg. That's always something worth dropping by. And of course, June 9th is the next episode of the Free Thought Forum. And now for our feature presentation here. On the right is Mr. Brian Fields, current president of Pennsylvania Nonbelievers, and Mr. Jim Eshleman, member of our PAN in Lancaster, PA. We will not be taking any phone calls until after 6:30, at which time we will display the numbers on the screen. Mr. Jim Eshleman has requested that he can make a short statement at the opening, followed by Brian will make his opening statement. So on to you, Mr. Jim Eshleman.
Hi. I don't know if I explained this to you before, Brian, but you know I've provoked this matter to the point where it came here to the Free Thought Forum. I always read a lot of nonfiction, and when I retired 2 years ago, I've been reading more, a lot of psychology, evolutionary psychology, and I began to come across many references to free will. Very few of them were developed in any way. It seemed like the writers didn't want to risk their professional reputation to go anywhere very daring with it. So it bothered me because I wasn't so sure about it myself. So I gave myself a project about a year ago, and that was to read all I could on the matter. And out of that and a discussion with you came the idea that we should put this program on here. And since then, I think I've come upon the two things that I want to accomplish here today. The first is to create a space and keep it defended against the very usual and common attacks on free will, so that even though we can't prove free will, and I'm never going to say that we can, we have a place where it can exist. And second, what I want to do is put together a scenario of how it will work, how it can work, so that anybody who chooses to take his personal feelings into the matter and would like to be able to say, I think we do have free will, has a way to explain it to himself. When I was very young, I used to lose sleep over things like what happened before the Big Bang, and where does the universe end, and things like that. I don't lose sleep over anything anymore, and free will is something also I don't lose sleep over, but it's very much closer to us. And it's along with the other things that surround free will, it's one of those miracles that we may never be able to totally explain. But as for having a way to go forward into tomorrow, that's the path that I want to take. So, Brian, where can you go next?
Well, I would start out by saying good luck with that. I can't really. I mean, first let's start by defining our terms so we make sure that we're talking the same language. And so I would consider free will when you're saying we have free will or we would have free will. I obviously in our conversations before and for the viewing audience don't believe in free will. I don't believe that there's a mechanism in physics, in biology that supports the notion of what most people would consider free will. But I think it's important to defend our terms to make sure that we're talking the same language so that people in the audience can understand, and so that we don't talk past each other or anything like that. And as you said, I'm looking forward to this show as a conversation. The idea is for us to be able to take the opportunity and just talk about the ideas that we've both been exposed to, but to define free will, I would say free will is the ultimate uncaused cause, and that is, it is a way for you to originate a choice from options presented, freely independent from any outside stimulus, and come up with a solution to that would be a choice from the options that you have available to you. If you were to define what would be truly free will.
Well,
now, there's variations.
There's a lot of landmines in those
agree.
paragraphs that you just put forth.
And I agree with that. And that's why I, there are other ways that you can define free will that don't necessarily mean what people might think free will means. I get concerned when people say free will. They're talking about this independent agency in your brain that allows you to make a decision regardless of well, I can do what I want to do, and there's nothing outside of me that tells me to do what I want to do. And I get concerned that people don't realize that our brains don't work that way, at least to the current understanding of our knowledge.
Well, I've come upon a lot of that. There are so many books written today with the word illusion in the title.
Connected to free will.
Yes, Wegner wrote a great one, The Illusion of Conscious Will, I think. Mm-hmm. And I read that, but I'm not going to refer to that today. The self-illusion is another one. Mm-hmm. Some writers think that consciousness is an illusion. Mm-hmm. But here is a lot of what free will is to me, and this is from Bruce Hood's The Self-Illusion. Most of us believe that unless we are under duress or suffering from some form of mental disorder, we all have the capacity to freely make decisions and choices. This is the common belief that our decisions are not preordained and that we can choose between alternatives. This is what most people mean by having free will. The belief that human behavior is an expression of personal choice and is not determined by physical forces. That's where we're going to have our first little skirmish, I suspect. By the way,
and I would disagree with that too. So
okay, the word debate came up here a month ago, and I suggested that I don't want to debate because I don't want the topic to get lost in the formalities of debating. So I think maybe we can start out by the most common attack on free will is determinism.
Sure.
And I have some definitions of that.
Okay.
But since you are going to probably use it in your arguments, why don't you define determinism?
Determinism is essentially the idea that for every result, it is determined, the outcome of the result is determined by the actions that precede it. So therefore, one could theoretically predict, if one had absolute knowledge of absolute circumstances.
Infinite knowledge.
Infinite knowledge of absolute circumstances. One could predict the outcome if one knew the entirety of the initial conditions. And when I use the word entirety carefully, because when we say, I know the initial conditions, when you talk about something complex as the human mind, there are a lot of conditions to account for. So while, and that's why they talk about the illusion of free will, is while we are not able, like I can't predict what you're thinking right now, because it's not possible for me to know, or what you might be thinking 5 minutes from now or 10 minutes from now. And that's because I do not have even a basic grasp of what's going on in your brain right now. But if I knew the entirety of the conditions now as to what the state of your brain is, the entirety, the whole of it, I would say that it would be easy enough once you have that level of knowledge to be able to predict 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes down the road what you were thinking.
That is correct me if I'm wrong, that's a classical idea. And it especially found its way after Newton's work. It fits well in that part of matter and energy that Newton dealt with.
Sure.
Determinism itself, though, is a philosophical term.
I disagree.
Then I will ask you to define it in a way that rebuts what I'm ready to say, and that is that for there to be determinism, we need to know all the laws that pertain to any situation with matter and energy in any form. In other words, we need to know all of them, and we need to know how they interact. If they conflict each other, if they don't add together well. For example, relativity and quantum theory. We don't have the unified field theory yet.
That's correct.
So that is a problem for determinism.
No.
Because it can't force upon all situations apart and add up the results of all the different laws that may be acting on the situation. That's something also that has to be, there has to be a capability of that to be done before. Okay, go ahead.
I disagree. I think that if you're talking about determinism, you're talking about what is possible rather than what is capable. So just because the first question would be, is it possible to know everything you could possibly know about the universe?
Well, now, we don't have to quibble on that.
Right. So, but our knowledge of whether the universe, whether we have all of those variables or not, does not mean that we can't predict that sometime in the future we might know all of those variables. But even aside from whether we might know all of those variables,
right.
the state of whether the universe is deterministic or not is a question first for physics. It's not a question of philosophy. It's a question for physics.
It is a question of, the term is not dealt with in physics.
It is. That's incorrect.
Here's a guy who's making a statement. Michael Gazzaniga, by the way, he's making a statement that physicists are now running away from determinism. And he goes on and on quite a bit about, and I'm going to let you get into this, of course, about emergent systems and emergent states, and the way that if any system, if any laws are probabilistic, the way that quantum theory is, then how can that be added together with, however deterministic all other laws are, how can that be added together with them and have a result that is deterministic? You may think so, and I may say no.
Well, I will say first, I want to make sure that we clarify from a reasoned standpoint a flaw here, in that the death of determinism does not, if determinism was killed by physics, which it hasn't been yet, and I'm not going to concede that point. It has not been.
No, I won't say it has.
No.
But I'm saying there's enough doubt that's been brought to it.
The only doubt in determinism right now is on the quantum physics level. I am not a quantum physicist. You're not a quantum physicist.
No, I am not.
And we do not have. I would say that we do not have we do not have enough information about how quantum physics works yet in order to make a rational statement about whether determinism works on the quantum physics level or not. But when we move above the quantum physics level, when we talk about the standard model of physics and into the macro, determinism works really well. And our brains work on that level. They don't work on the quantum physics level, and there's nothing in quantum physics that produces a theory of self or a theory of agency or anything like that. We still have to deal with the consequences of the physical in the brain and what we see when we talk about things like fMRIs and stuff like that, where we can image the brain and image the brain making up its mind way before conscious thought takes over.
Well, I know we have to go there tonight.
And I can back off of that for the moment. But I wanted to touch on, you had said about, you had talked about the physics and determinism as a, determinism being something that requires knowledge. Determinism requiring knowledge of all the circumstances. And I'm saying that if the universe is deterministic, it is deterministic whether we observe those qualities or not. It is outside of our property of observing the universe. So if we start with looking at physics above the quantum physics level, and we look and we see determinism there, and we don't see determinism in quantum physics, at some point those two ideas have to be reconciled with each other. But I'm reserving judgment on that at this point to say I'm not confident that I'm fairly confident that free will doesn't exist, because our brains still operate on that above quantum physics level. We have identifiable processes in our brains that we can recognize when we're making decisions. And even conscious decisions, and this has been measured in the laboratory. This isn't something where we can look at fMRIs. We can see, well, this area of the brain is active and processing before someone recognizes that they're thinking about something.
Right.
And if it's happening before someone has consciousness of them happening it, how can one claim that there's a such thing as a free will?
There is a way to do that, and I certainly would not have come here tonight if I didn't have a way that I thought I could explain that and walk away and be confident about it.
Okay.
First of all, back on a little bit on determinism again. I will loan you this book called Laws, Mind, and Free Will.
Okay.
And there you can find what I think are good arguments and try to reconcile them with your current feelings about the matter. There are so many ways, and mostly, I believe you could use the word circumstantial to support free will in this way. Go out on the street and everybody thinks they have it. Now wait, I understand that's not scientific, but everybody thinks they have it. Why do they think they have it if they don't?
I can explain that.
If evolution gave us this, despite what's going on between our ears, gave us this idea that we make decisions and we follow them through. The less that somebody has actually thought about free will, I'm convinced if we go on the street, we'll find the more they believe that they make these decisions. One writer said, consciousness has given us an awareness of making these decisions so we can be better moral characters. So I would respond to that is, if we don't have a way to make decisions in the first place, it doesn't too much matter how moral character, how good moral characters we are. But
I disagree with that.
okay, yeah, I know. So I think that the philosophers dealt with this matter for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. And they got to the point where the philosophers still writing on free will today are torturing the language as much as anything, because they have to write books, they have to sell books, they have to keep tenure, and all those good things. I came upon one book written by a philosopher on free will that talked about certain acts, A-C-T-S, as having a finkish disposition. I took that book and sent it off to the library book sale. To me, that was just torturing the language. What I look for today is the answers to come out of neuroscience. Mm-hmm. If we can take, and we obviously, here we are again, we can't know enough to really nail down determinism with absolute authority, and we can't take a poll of all the neurons to figure out what they're doing and how they add up.
Well, we can figure out how they add up. I mean, I agree that the technology isn't there to directly measure each individual neuron. But what we can do is we can see the system at work on a higher level and see exactly which regions of the brain is talking to which region of the brain. But I wanted to respond to a couple of things. You probably are, I mean, the way people perceive the world around them as a function of evolutionary processes has nothing to do with how the processes actually work. Polling reality by poll is useless.
I admitted that.
I just want to be clear here, because that seems to be the core of your argument that
well, these same people think that they make a decision while the matter is active in their consciousness. And it's, I believe, probably going to be very hard for many of them to accept that the decisions are made in their unconscious. And then they come to the conscious as the feeling, a feeling and a statement that I am making this decision. Mm-hmm. It comes to them present tense, mm-hmm, that I am making this decision. I'm not going to argue about that. And this is where we get into Benjamin Libet's work. And he's the guy who, back in the 80s, and I don't know what equipment he had to do this with, but he's the guy that put a name, readiness potential, on a part of the brain that lit up fractions of a second before somebody was conscious of making a decision.
Right.
I can't argue with that all of the things that go together to make a decision are adding up below the conscious level. And then the awareness of making the decision, things that come to consciousness, come to it slowly. We have a whole lot of behavior and thoughts that are outside our control, and a lot for good reason. We want to respond to a snake in the grass without deliberating over it.
Sure.
We want to string.
Well, and I was actually, if you'll give me a few minutes, I wanted to touch on how the brain is operating in decision making and stuff like that.
Okay.
It's my understanding, with apologies to any neuroscientists out there where I might screw this up, as a layperson, it's my understanding that there are two areas of the brain essentially involved with decision making, and one kind of gatekeeper in between. The prefrontal cortex is involved in your reasoning skills. That's where you're going to be doing your higher order thinking about, do I do this or do I do that? In your limbic system, which is the other area, that's where you're going to do, your brain does the kind of more instinctual processing, your fight, flight, fear, feeding, and sex, things like that. That's where your brain comes up with those decisions, okay? And now in the middle is kind of a gatekeeper part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala controls how the brain uses each area for processing. And it kind of works on an inverse scale. So the more you're using your prefrontal cortex, the less you're using your limbic system, and vice versa. The more you're using your limbic system, the less you're using you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, I do.
And so you're not going to have much conscious thought over your limbic system. Your limbic system is going to react the way you are evolutionarily wired to react. Unless you have more practice at using your prefrontal cortex, and that's something you can. But the thing is,
no, you would say you can't practice.
Well, that's not
only,
true.
Only
Whoa! You're
if
misrepresenting my argument.
Has allowed it to come to mind that you should practice.
There you go.
Somehow.
That's the key. That's the key.
But that's where I'm going to punch a hole in this.
Well, let me finish.
I'm going to say that we can prime. You know what priming means? We can prime ourselves to make better decisions by what we're conscious of and what we ruminate over. We send messages back to that unconscious level that sways the decision.
I don't think that, I think that you're talking about using your prefrontal cortex more, and using your reasoning, and you can actually practice. You can actually practice reducing your emotional response to certain things, but it takes practice, and it's still not free will. And the reason why I say that is it's an iterative process you're talking about here, where you're saying, I'm going to practice more rational approaches to decision making. So I'm going to take in information around me and come up with the best decision. But I'm saying that the framework of that decision is still based on your knowledge and experiences, your history, and the actual physical makeup of your brain, rather than a conscious choice.
I don't disagree with most of that. However, all those things that add up beneath our consciousness to a decision, I don't think they force the decision to be made in one exact way. Here I wrote this word down, because this is important to me today. They influence it. There is no doubt that they influence it. Anything we've ever heard from anybody around us that pertains to the topic of our decision might be brought forth subconsciously to bear on that decision. Also, the idea that we need to get away from an emotional aspect of decision making is something that we probably are never going to be able to do.
No, I'm not saying you can't.
The emotions are also very closely aligned with what we call the reward centers.
Sure.
And these are neurotransmitter type actions. And neurotransmitters are things that we have levels of. So where does that exact level happen where it'll trigger so many neurons in a certain direction, and it has to be so exact that we can count on this to happen? That's one of the things that makes the brain working on decisions into an emergent system, and one that I'm going to give enough leeway that on certain situations, and one writer calls them torn decisions. He admits that most of the day we don't work this way. But when we have something that really stops us in our tracks so that we have time and we can step away from the pressure of a decision, and we can really, as much as possible, take account of our influences, that's when we get to use anything that is possibly worthy of being called free will.
I disagree with that too, and I'll give you the reason why. But first, I'm going to do an illustration based on a paradox that a philosopher friend of mine really enjoys. Okay, have you ever heard of the Buridan's ass paradox? That's the one where you have a donkey. Have you ever heard of this one before?
No.
Okay, so the idea is you have this donkey who is standing in a space with two exactly equal, perfectly equal measures of food, directly equidistant from the donkey. One's on the left, one's on the right, but they're exactly distant from the donkey. You've got, and the donkey has to make a decision, and there's nothing in its experience to favor one or the other or anything like that.
No, okay.
But let me finish.
Okay.
Let me finish, please, and then I'll let you respond. But so the idea, the philosopher, or the paradox is basically what would happen. That if the donkey has a choice between two exactly equal propositions, how does the donkey make up its mind? And the original solution to the paradox, the idea would be that the donkey would starve to death.
I've heard that.
Okay.
In some other form.
And I don't agree with it.
No, I don't either.
I think that what would happen, there are, to make it as laymanized as possible, there are meters in our brains that measure certain things like level of hunger and frustration, and all these little things in our brains that identify exactly how how we might respond in a given circumstance, different values that we weigh when we're trying to make a decision. And the thing that Buridan's ass neglects two things. First of all, our brains, when there's a function of time involved in the paradox that gets ignored. And that is that as time goes on, the donkey's going to look left and look right. And as the measure of hunger in its brain rises, at some point it will cross a threshold by which the caring of making a decision no longer matters, and it must have food. And so you could predict if you knew what that threshold was in its brain, you could predict exactly which food it would go for based on time and what the donkey's typical behavior is when it's making a decision. Does it look left and look right, etc.? All these variables. Once you have that together, even though it's one of those decisions that is a torn, conflicted decision like the ones you've outlined, it would still time would still be the ultimate solution to what tears down the eventual choice that someone makes. And what it's based on is, when you run into a decision like that, you don't know which choice to make. Time as a factor gives you new input that allows you to then, based on your experience, come up with a more refined decision. But it's based on time and it's based on experience.
Okay.
It's not based on choice.
I wouldn't have tortured that donkey quite that badly.
Well, I don't think anybody would have.
I think
it's mean to do that to donkeys.
I think what's going to happen, and not after too long a while, is that donkey is used to taking its first step with either the left or the right
Certainly.
foot. And that is going to determine which way it goes.
But it is determined.
That is going to determine
is
within the
determined.
system of the donkey.
But it is determined.
It is. I don't care if you want to argue whether the donkey can make decisions or not. We have here's what I saw. If we're going to do animal stories, here's what I actually saw happen to me. We had a cat, and it was walking past me on the way to its food bowl. And I called for it to come over and get some attention. It stopped in its tracks and stood there. And it was so notable because I had never seen this before. Actually, I had seen so few things stop that cat on the way to the food bowl. But it took probably 3 or 4 seconds, and you could see it was fighting. There's two things very different. The need for affection and the need for food were posed against each other.
Right.
It was a fascinating moment, and of course I wasn't insulted when it eventually went to the food bowl.
Because
But
the hunger threshold
well, you're right.
level had
What
been raised above
happened
its threshold.
inside that cat was the certain needs that were at one point balanced in some way. Eventually, one became stronger and took over.
Right.
Well, we have that too.
I agree.
But we can, well, maybe we don't have much more than one writer said. We have free won't. If we have done our best to understand our choices, if we have done our best to filter out influences that we would rather not have bear on this decision, and we're feeling very strongly about option A, we can still always say, no, I'm not going to do that.
I don't agree. I think that the decision to not choose option A is based on additional input, even if the input is, I'm going to be contrarian because you tell me I don't have free will. I've had this argument with people before when I'm talking about free will. People say, well, I can choose not to do what you're, well, you've got this new information that I'm throwing at you that's based on you not wanting to think that you don't have free will. But I do think that free will, I think that the reason why when you do the poll out on the street and 99% of the people on the street are going to respond, yes, we have free will, is because will is so connected to our identity. We have this construct in our head that is our identity about who we are and what we're capable of. And an ego that is so strong, in most people, the ego is so strong that it is anathema to think, I don't actually make the decisions I make, that my brain makes those decisions independent from what I would consider I.
But
now, if you consider I the entirety of your brain processing, it still, in the end, becomes not much more than a meat machine processing input and causing output. You know, your brain is, you know, when you talk about it in computer terms, you've got input, process, output. You've got stuff that comes in, it gets processed by a machine, and then it gets spit out the other side. It's really, really, really complicated. And it's not as easy on the surface to identify the process that's going on behind the scenes that's making those decisions. And that's why I would say that the average person on the street isn't going to comprehend everything that goes into making every decision that they make. And in fact, I don't think that I think too hard about what's going on behind the scenes every time I make a decision. I would like to do it more in those circumstances where it's possible. Obviously, you know, if there's a snake in the bush, I'm not going to sit there and contemplate the decisions that are available. But there are areas in my life where I think that it's wise to take the time out to contemplate. And one of those areas, I think, is morality. And we had talked earlier off the camera about what bearing free will has on deciding what's moral. And as we are both non-believers, we both don't look to dogma to generate our ideas about what's right and what's wrong. So I think that free will does have bearing on morality. And I think one of those areas that it has a lot of bearing on is things like crime and punishment. If in your head you have that people are making free choices, then you're left with, I think, what is the inescapable conclusion that there are tendencies of people to do more wrong than right. And those of the religious persuasion might call those people evil, or those people.
I'm not. I don't have a problem at all with where you're going, but I'm not ready to go with. If we're going to go somewhere that says, okay, how should we live if we believe in free will, and how should we live if we don't? That's kind of like follows after, and I'm not quite done with making an argument for the possibility that there is free will.
That's fine. I wanted to move on to morality only because we have 20 minutes left of the program.
Oh, that's a countdown. Okay.
So I just
Okay.
wanted to move along the segments,
Okay.
but we can
Well,
certainly in
let
the
me
extended program
finish this though.
Okay.
Despite all that's happened here already today, I still think there's a place where I can walk out of here and I can help others who want to see it that way believe that they have free will. And I think there's 2 or 3 different authors here who will, some of them say flat out, free will is impossible, but yet they have discovered that when people believe in free will, they act differently.
That's a possibility, and I'm not going to dispute
It's a positive matter in that case. If you want me to pull that up, I don't really feel like pulling it out of here right now. But their dispositions, their willingness to help others, and things like that are more likely to be there if they believe in free will.
I would actually say, that extends for some people to God as well. There are some people who, if they believe in a God or believing somebody's watching over them, that they will behave better.
Well, that's not a lot different from putting the picture of 2 eyes above the little cup that people put their coins in when they take a cup of coffee.
It's interesting, and that's exactly correct. And for our viewers to explain what he's talking about,
Thank you.
there are plenty of studies that have been done that show that we are wired. If you've got eyeballs on the wall, if someone takes a poster of a pair of eyeballs and just throws it up on the wall in a cubicle somewhere where you're working, those people tend to be more honest and they tend to be more forthcoming. Now, that does not mean that those eyeballs have agency and they're watching you. It means that our brains are wired a certain way to deal with what we understand to be the reality around us.
The social order that you can almost not subtract out of human evolution.
Well, now, I would disagree with that. I think it's possible to subtract it out, and that's where I would move into the morality question.
I don't think it is, because I think there's so much of our decision making that we gained capacity on because of the social aspect of our lives for hundreds of thousands of years.
I, as a matter of what little faith I might have, would prefer to take it on faith that it would be more ideal if we knew the actual reality of the universe around us and acted in accordance as to how we understood the universe based on the way it actually is. If we knew as many true things, if we believed in as many true things as possible and disbelieved in as many false things as possible, I think that in the end that would make for a more ideal system of understanding.
Well, I don't hear that you're taking into account what I'm saying. I'm saying man as the social animal he is. In Western world here, we usually start by identifying ourselves as individuals, and then we discover where we attach here and there.
Sure.
In the Eastern world, it starts out with where we're attached, and we probably wouldn't be having a discussion of free will in the Eastern world because they don't care. They just are so influenced by each other, and that's their social world that they live in. We start out by judging our own decisions And that's how we get to wonder
Now,
about
and
free will.
you could argue that that's cultural, but by the same token, we are all still human beings with very similar brains and very similar structures. And so I would say that if you take a look at the fact that we are perfectly willing or able as a species to survive in the Eastern world as we are in the Western world, that it would be irrelevant to whether we understood free will to exist or not, and we as a species could adapt to what we understood to be a new reality. If we had incontrovertible evidence that the universe is deterministic, if we had incontrovertible evidence that free will does not exist and is a construct of what our brains produce, I think that we could perfectly well adapt to this new paradigm that we might understand. And to move back into morality, because now we're down to 15 minutes or 14 minutes or so. I think that it does play a lot in how we see each other and the decisions that we make. If we understand the framework of our decisions as based on our biology and our upbringing, that has a lot to say with how we handle things like crime and punishment.
So how do you believe that so much of the institutions that we have today were built with the idea that we have free will?
Yes.
So how do we change those if we don't?
I would say, well, first of all, I'm going to start on a high level, given our time, and then we'll go into kind of a more detailed look. But I would say that a crime and punishment system based on the idea that we do not have free will would look a lot like what they've been doing lately in Scandinavia. I think it's Sweden or Denmark or somewhere up there. They've taken the approach to crime and punishment to be more of a therapy and society re-education instead of retribution. And I think that our system in this country of crime and punishment is solidly based on getting revenge for somebody's choices.
If we still have to put people away because they're not learning a different way, and as long as they don't learn that different way, they will be a danger to us.
Right.
Then that is the only reason for incarceration?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay.
The purpose of incarceration should be attempting to find a way to integrate that person into society as a whole, or keeping them away from society if there is no way to reintegrate them and they are only a danger, and they are a danger to themselves or other people. A physical or monetary, if they're stealing and things like that. When we treat crime and punishment as retributive, as we've done in this country, we see a high level of recidivism. We see a high level of, you hear people talking about the system churning out, more and more dangerous criminals when they come out of prison. When you talk about, when you see a person's choices as a function of who they are, rather than a function of good choices or evil choices. When you strip away the idea of, or right choices and wrong choices, if you prefer. When you start to see the choices as a function of biology, then I think it allows for people to have a little more, I guess the right word would be empathy, for the idea that the person who made that choice made it because their biology or their experiences or a combination thereof caused them to make those choices. And while they're a danger, and that danger needs to be addressed by society, that doesn't mean they made the choices because there's some force of evil inside them that should be, that they need to be punished for. And
okay. Now, we've played this out, assuming that we all accept there is no free will, and then we fix our institutions to follow up after that.
Sure.
How do we play this out if there is indeed free will? Because we already have a whole lot of things set up based on the idea that we do. are there some things, and you and I don't disagree on the retribution matter, are there some things that we change anyway if we want to go forward and everybody, and I say I will act as if I have free will.
Sure,
and
that's
a
your
lot of
choice.
people will.
Uh-huh.
So that means that there probably should be some understanding of how we are going to go on making the world a better place.
Well, and I think that you don't necessarily have to act in order as if you have free will in order to evaluate all the options available to you and consider what might be the best choice to make, with the understanding that you personally have certain biases that will lead you to choose certain options.
Right. Well, we have all these things inside us that we can't even make a total list of. We can't judge how powerful each one of them is, but, and I still say that they don't determine our acts, they influence them. And by feeding back through, we can do some prioritizing on those influences and possibly change the power of them, like the cat who waited for his answer.
Well, and and that's why the title of this program, I think, was important in what we came up with, which was free will, does it exist or does it matter? And I don't think that for the average person on the street, it really matters whether they understand they have free will or not, with the proviso that people start understanding that. You see, one of the things that's attractive to me to recognizing that free will doesn't exist is I think it allows us to be more empathic towards people who are a negative force in society. Understanding that that person is not evil, but broken.
Or at least just different.
Or different, and that's a possibility. I'm talking about in more extreme cases where different, different is tolerable in society as long as it's not harmful to others.
Yeah.
But I will give you different for most people. Okay. And actually, it would be very hard, I think, to say that because someone is different, that it is necessarily good or bad. And I think that there are enough different people. It's hard to come up with the median. There isn't an average person.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It's a continuum.
Yeah.
And maybe it's who knows what the standard deviation is, and
right.
and so on and so forth. But we have to get safety inside Six Sigma and all that good stuff.
Right. and that's not only a need that is wired within us. I mean, we have the need in our brains. That's one of the core things we need, is that personal safety. And I think that building a society is always going to be based on individual safety as well as the safety of the society as a whole. But by the same token, there is plenty of variation within that standard deviation that you're talking about, that it's hard. One of the things that I've worked on personally in my life is when I'm dealing with people, especially people who frustrate me or anger me because they come from different points of view, and is to remember that they're coming by their points of view based on their experiences and their biology, rather than based on their making a conscious choice to piss me off.
How true.
And I'll grant you that there are plenty of people that will probably try to make a conscious choice to piss me off.
There was
or try to make a conscious choice to piss me off.
A railroad engineer, what is that? Norfolk Southern, that operates around Lancaster, who actually parked his train across a crossing. It cost me 10 minutes today to get here. I hope he had a real good reason.
But he probably did. But
yeah, he probably did, but
Or he might even have had a bad reason. But, those things are, again, based on the circumstances and whatever's going on in that circumstance.
Well, I guess maybe it's just my age. Yeah. I get a little softer, a little more forgiving, a little bit more understanding as I get older, but
it's hard sometimes.
It's not easy.
I think we're running short on time. Our plan tonight is we're probably going to continue our conversation a little bit. We might have some things to talk about off camera, but if when the show winds up, the whole program, whatever the end of our program might end up being, is going to be available on YouTube. So if we come to the end of the show and the conversation is still going, you can catch us on YouTube in the next couple days. Our next show is going to be on Tuesday, June 9th, and we'll be back with our regular hosts, Doug and Jacob, and we hope to see you there, and or come out to our meetings, and we'll be glad to meet you, and especially we've got our riverboat thing coming up on May 31st. That'd be a wonderful opportunity to come out and hang out with us and have a good time. But we can get back to our conversation, and again, if the program cuts off, we're sorry about that, but you can catch us on YouTube. So in any case, we were talking about the function of different biology and the way that people interact and experiences and stuff like that. Understanding on a visceral level that stuff is a function rather than a choice. Because I think when you take a look at somebody and say, well, that person is choosing to make me angry, and a lot of people do that. A lot of people will do this.
I've never used those words, but I know my brain was doing that.
Exactly. Most people don't consciously admit that that's what's going on in their brain. But there are so many people, and I hear the story when something bad happens to them. Well, that person must have had it in for me. And the story tends to be centered on them as an individual. But so often the story is something went on in that person's life that was in their experiences or the way they're wired or their upbringing or whatever that caused them to make the decision they made. And with you, as you might have been a factor, but you're going to be a factor in a mix of a lot of factors. And but people take it personally, and I think that recognizing that free will isn't part of the equation goes a long way to fostering empathy and understanding.
I don't think we need to do away with free will to accomplish that, though. You may think it's much more. You may think it's more. It's easier to do if we give up that idea, but I don't. One of the things that we're talking about here is behavior in large city-states, which is far into the hundreds of thousands of years that humans put their mental circuitry together. I started referring to way back when we were all hunter-gatherers in little groups. We influenced each other so thoroughly that if you were anything like a criminal, they sent you off into the wilderness and you died out there.
Right.
Because you couldn't live without your group.
Right.
Their influence on each other was so immediate. They used their motor neurons to understand each other. They actually talked non-stop. One primitive group was discovered, and they actually talked the same stuff over and over again. They never stopped talking to each other all day long. So they kind of never had minds of their own. They kind of never had to make a decision. It was always a group decision, perhaps focused through a certain person. But when we're talking about things like what we call criminality today, this is so far away from what that experience over hundreds of thousands of years prepared us to deal with.
I don't know that that's. I mean, as you say, they're when you talk about criminality as coming up with a more constructive system that we had discussed earlier, I think you and I both agree that would be a more ideal way to. we're back from the
You're
break.
forgiven.
Yeah, I take full responsibility for our end credit music. It was my pick, and that was the conversation we were having during the credits. Jim, I picked it because it was unencumbered. That means we can use it without having to pay any legal rights. We are a nonprofit organization, and I wanted something that sounded kind of a highbrow.
It's a little bit upbeat. It's enough upbeat too. Yeah.
I mean, if anybody has suggestions for alternatives or wants us to feature their music, feel free to contact us. As long as we have written permission, I'd be perfectly happy to consider replacing it. But I'm actually quite happy with it.
No, I'll let it go. We certainly don't want Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings.
But yeah, so we were talking about crime and punishment, and you mentioned about the communal kind of a communal zeitgeist of experience and choice and things like that. And we have come along. I don't think we've come that far when it comes to crime and punishment. I think we should come.
I don't know if we can ever quite catch up and have something that lifestyle.
Are you saying about? Are you talking about exile as a form of punishment?
No, I'm going back to saying that the way the hunter-gatherers got along was brutal and efficient.
Fair.
It had to be efficient because their survival depended on it.
But it's not humanist, and that we would talk about humanism as an ideal.
Exactly.
I consider myself a humanist, and I assume you are as well.
Yes, that's why we have so many options to talk about today, because the pressures don't bear in on us to conform, and we have a lot of wonderful ability not to conform here.
Yeah. Well, and that's why it's funny because the first reaction I get when I bring up my objections to free will are usually, well, I can make the choice not to believe you, or I can make the choice to, and it's like, well, but your choice is based on the input of what I've given you reflected on your desire to be obstinate or.
No, that's like the old argument that my philosophy overarches yours. No, yours overarches, and that can go on forever.
Sure.
So in.
But I'm just saying in the framework that's outlined.
Well, that's your framework.
Well, it's not. But that's the thing. When we're talking about frameworks, my goal is not to rely on my individual perception of a framework. My goal is to have an understanding of ultimate reality, whatever it might be, and conform my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs and the structure of how I view the universe based on that understanding.
Okay. Let me put this out there, and I'd never wondered about this before. Is there any hope that we're going to make advances on understanding more whether or not there is free will if it's only up to philosophers?
No.
Thank you. I think the answer lies in the hands of neuroscience right now.
I agree. I agree. I think that you can find clues to the answers in physics. You can find clues to the answers in biology. The clear cutting edge of the research being done actually right now in this field is in neurobiology and neuropsychology.
And we didn't even get to discuss J.D. Haynes' research. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm not sure.
Well, he's the guy that followed up Libet, and he had a button for each hand, and he discovered that he thought he could discern which one the person was going to press 7 to 10 seconds before the button was pressed.
Right.
Well, I know I can set you up in a way to bring you around the corner and spring a decision on you so quickly, and I can make you do it quickly, because if I put some money down on the table as an incentive for you to make that decision quickly, you're not going to be taking anywhere near 7 or 10 seconds.
No, but you'll be able to recognize
Also,
you'll be able to recognize the decision is not coming from my prefrontal cortex. You'll be able to recognize that the decision is coming from other areas of my brain that are not involved in cognition, that are more involved in the desire to have money.
free will. Mark Balaguer is a philosopher who makes way for free will. And one of the things he does with Haynes' research is he says the two parts of the brain that Haynes was saying showed this activity before the decision was made are actually parts of the brain associated with planning and storing plans rather than decision making. So if he's right, and also the fact that you can force people to make decisions that obviously don't need 7 or 10 seconds, then maybe there is some other ways to look at Haynes' research.
Well, I would still disagree with that.
But I don't disagree that a decision is made and then we become conscious of it.
Right.
That doesn't mean to me that we didn't make the decision, because if we have a decision worth making and we stop ourselves in our tracks to discover, like I said, all the influences and prioritize the things, there are certain things we want to have influence on our decisions. We don't want to be random. Random is...
I think the desire to have influence doesn't mean that we have influence.
I get that. Yeah, I get that.
I mean, I understand the desire to have influence over your thoughts, and I even understand when people have objections to what I'm saying. When I say I don't believe in free will, I understand that part of that objection isn't a reasoned objection. It is a strong connection to identity and a strong connection to I am who I am because I make the choices I make.
But you have drawn a system inside this circle that doesn't allow for anything else to be there.
I have drawn a circle to recognize.
It pleases you that all of this fits in your circle, and that does not include any way for there to be free will.
Well, I think we all like to be right. I mean,
okay.
I mean, that's okay. I think, in as much as you drawing a circle and saying free will is in this circle, and me drawing a circle and saying free will is not in this circle, we all like to be right, and that's part of that reward system in our brain you were talking about earlier. Part of how we build up our own ego is to take information and have our assumptions about the universe around us confirmed, especially when we weren't so sure before and we become more sure about information. It's a sense of victory to find, to discover some nugget of truth in the world around us if we can. And so then we build those circles based on those nuggets of truth we come across. And yes, there are biases as to whether, they should or that's okay or not. But I think part of our brains is the way we operate. I think part of it is we have to have a operating system, a set of operating guidelines that we live our lives by. We have to make assumptions in the face of not enough evidence sometimes.
Absolutely.
And
that's why we're here today.
It is. But I like to make the assumption, I like to start with the zero hypothesis. And the zero hypothesis is when you presume, when you say, when you propose something, you want to say that the default is that it doesn't exist, or it isn't there, or the answer is to the question is no. In the absence of any testing or data or anything like that. You start with no. And then you test for no. Okay? And then you test for yes, and you test variations of yes and all the other stuff. But you always have the null hypothesis, and that's where you start from. So in the lack of evidence, I'm not going to believe in without evidence, I'm not going to believe in vampires, I'm not going to believe in God, and I'm not going to believe in the celestial teapot, and I'm not going to believe in free will.
Well, by the same token, I'm not going to believe in determinism.
And I don't have to believe or not believe in determinism. I don't have to believe or not believe in determinism to still give to still say I don't believe in free will. However, the reason I believe in determinism is because in the universe with physics, we've tested everything above the subatomic level. And we know that
we know that we know all the laws.
We know that within the laws we test, that cause and effect operates reliably. Without determinism, the scientific method would not work. It would not work. We could not rely on the scientific method without a deterministic system to use for testing. Without determinism, science falls apart.
There may be another word I'd use there that keeps science a viable pursuit. I don't know if it would be determinism. Like
Cause and effect. That's all I'm doing is talking about cause and effect.
Yes. Like I say, I think determinism is a philosophical concept.
No,
you disagree with that.
Well, in quantum physics, actually, when you're talking about models of the universe, quantum physics actually uses determinism. There are several different quantum physics models that are being explored, string theory and all that other stuff.
Yeah,
and within those models, a share of them are deterministic and a share of them are not deterministic. And
when you say they're not deterministic, would you at that point use the word probabilistic?
That's another variable that's used.
Okay.
I'm saying that within those models there are different variables that describe the properties of the universe, and they aren't settled. And there's a bunch of different models. And a quantum physicist who watches this recording might beat me down because I'm not a quantum physicist. But it's my understanding that there are several different models, that some of them are preferred over others, but it's only because those models are attempts to explain the evidentiary data that we've observed. However, there are other ways to interpret the data that might support other models, and there's no way to figure out which one it is with any kind of reasoned certitude. But when we're not talking on the quantum physics level, we need cause and effect to work in order for science to work. Because if cause and effect didn't work, we wouldn't be able to rationally interpret the results of any experiment we had.
Okay. I think I'm finished.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in on the web. We went a little over for the rest of this conversation, but I'm so glad you joined us if you're watching this. And I hope you catch us next week, and have a great evening.
We had fun.
Yes, we did. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, gentlemen.